Rain lashed against the windows of a small roadside café just outside San Diego. It was one of those lonely places on the edge of the highway, a flickering neon sign, a few rusted pickup trucks outside, and a warm yellow glow inside that fought against the storm. Before we jump in, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, subscribe for more moments that actually mean something. The clock on the wall read 10:42 p.m. Most of the customers had already gone home, except for a few truckers nursing their coffee. Behind the counter stood a young woman named Elena, quiet, steady, with the kind of calm that didn't belong to someone her age. Her dark hair was tied in a neat bun, and her sharp blue eyes seemed to scan the room as if she was always assessing, always alert. Nobody knew much about her. She had started working there only 3 months ago. She never talked about her past. She just smiled politely, served coffee, and disappeared into the kitchen when conversations got loud. That night, the storm outside wasn't the only one brewing. Around 10:50, 3 men burst through the door, drunk, loud, and wearing military jackets. They looked like soldiers or men who wanted to be. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, slammed the door open so hard that it rattled the frame. "Hey, sweetheart," he barked, swaggering toward the counter. "Coffee, strong, and make it quick." Elena didn't flinch. She simply turned to the pot, poured the coffee, and placed it on the counter. "Here you go," she said softly. The man took it without saying thanks. His 2 friends sat in a booth, laughing about something too loudly for comfort. Then one of them muttered, "You see her eyes? Cold as ice." "I like that." Elena ignored them, focusing on wiping down the counter. But the tall man, the one with the scar, wasn't done. He leaned forward, studying her name tag. "Elena, huh? You don't look like a waitress. What's your story?" "Everyone's got a story," she replied, not looking at him. "But this isn't the place for it." His eyes narrowed. "I wasn't asking for philosophy." He slammed his cup down, spilling coffee over the counter. "I asked for your story." The cafe went silent. Even the old jukebox seemed to stop humming. Elena slowly looked up, her calm gaze locking with his. "And I told you, I'm just a waitress." The man laughed harshly. "Wrong answer." Before anyone could move, he pulled a pistol from his jacket and pressed it against her forehead. The room froze. A trucker by the door tried to stand, but one of the other soldiers barked, "Sit down," and waved him back with a warning glare. Rain hammered harder outside. The thunder rolled. Elena didn't blink. Her breathing stayed even. Her voice didn't shake when she said, "You don't want to do that." The man grinned, enjoying the power. "Oh yeah, and why not?" She stared at him, her tone quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "Because you just pointed a gun at a Navy SEAL." The color drained from his face. For a split second, the gun trembled in his hand. Then, something in the air changed, like the calm before an explosion. And the cafe was about to learn exactly why you never threaten a Navy SEAL. The cafe was deathly silent. The rain outside sounded like gunfire on the roof. The soldier's hand trembled, just slightly, barely noticeable, but Elena caught it. Her eyes stayed locked on his. What did you say?" "He stammered." "I said," Elena repeated, her voice low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. "You just pointed a weapon at a Navy SEAL." The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning. The other 2 men at the booth looked at each other, uncertain now. "Man, she's bluffing," one muttered. "There's no way." "Then ask your friend to find out," she interrupted. Her tone didn't waver, not even slightly. She slowly reached for a napkin on the counter, a movement so smooth and measured that even the man with the gun didn't know whether to react. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice cracking this time. But she was already still. Her eyes never left his. "You think you've got control here," she said softly. "But I've been in situations 10 times worse than this. You're holding that gun like a scared rookie?" I can tell by how your index finger keeps twitching. A flicker of panic crossed his face, because she was right. One of the truckers, a gray-haired man sitting near the door, whispered under his breath, "Son, put that thing down before you make the biggest mistake of your life." But the soldier didn't listen. His pride was louder than his fear. "You think I won't pull the trigger?" he hissed. Elena leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think you'll regret it before the bullet leaves the chamber." And then it happened. In less than a second, faster than anyone could process, Elena's hand shot forward. She grabbed the gun, twisted his wrist, slammed her elbow into his forearm, and the weapon flew across the counter. Before he could even yell, she pivoted, grabbed the man's jacket, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard, gasping in pain. The gun landed somewhere behind the counter with a metallic clatter. The two other soldiers leapt up, chairs crashing to the floor. "Hey!" one shouted, pulling a knife from his belt. Elena was already moving. She ducked under the counter, grabbed the fallen man's arm, and twisted it behind his back with precision. The move was surgical. No wasted motion, no hesitation. "You're done," she said quietly. "Stay down." The man grunted, struggling. "Who the hell are you?" Elena pressed his arm tighter until he stopped resisting. "I told you. Navy SEAL. Retired. And tonight, you just picked the wrong waitress." The one with the knife hesitated, eyes darting between his injured friend and Elena. "You?" "You're lying," he said, his voice breaking. "Try me," she replied. He looked ready to rush her, but something in her stare froze him in place. It wasn't anger. It was precision, discipline, and something darker, the eyes of someone who had seen real combat and walked away from it. The door burst open. Blue and red lights flashed through the rain. The trucker by the door had called the cops while everyone was focused on the standoff. Two officers stormed in with guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them." Elena stood up slowly, releasing the man on the floor. "The weapons behind the counter," she said, raising her hands calmly. "These men were threatening me." The lead officer looked at her, then at the bruised man groaning on the ground. "You did this?" he asked, astonished. "Yes, sir," she said simply. "He pointed a gun at my head." The officer's eyes widened slightly when he noticed the Navy trident tattoo partially visible beneath her sleeve, the mark of a SEAL. The soldier on the floor groaned. "She's crazy. She broke my arm." The officer knelt beside him and gave him a cold stare. "You're lucky that's all she broke, son." The man didn't respond. The officers cuffed the three men, leading them out into the storm. As they passed the window, one of them, the scar-faced one, turned back to look at Elena. His face was pale, wet with sweat and rain. "Who are you, really?" he muttered. Elena just looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I'm someone who's seen too many boys like you confuse fear for strength." He said nothing after that. The café went quiet again. As the police cars disappeared into the rain, the old trucker took off his hat, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, I've been around a long time, but I've never seen anything like that." Elena just smiled faintly, wiped the counter where the coffee had spilled, and said, "Just doing my job." But deep inside, the storm in her eyes hadn't passed, because what she didn't tell them, what nobody knew, was that she hadn't left the Navy because she wanted to. She'd left because of something she could never forget. And that night, that gun to her head had brought it all rushing back. The cafe was quiet again. The clock ticked toward midnight. Rain still poured outside, but the danger had passed. The police lights were gone, and the last of the shaken customers had left, murmuring in awe about the waitress who fought off soldiers. Elena locked the door, flipped the sign to close, and leaned against the counter. Her breathing had steadied, but her hands, they trembled just a little. She looked down at them, strong, calloused hands trained for survival, and for a moment, she didn't see the cafe anymore. She saw the ocean, the smell of salt water, the roar of helicopter blades. the distant crack of gunfire echoing across ways that glowed under the moonlight. She was back there in uniform. Years ago, Lieutenant Elena Hawk Reyes, U.S. Navy SEAL. Her team had been deployed off the coast of Somalia, tracking a human trafficking ring that was smuggling hostages across the sea. It was supposed to be a clean rescue, fast, quiet. Surgical. WA send single quotes. T. Her voice cracked in her memory. Bravo team, move. We've got civilians inside. Then the explosion. The boat erupted into chaos. Fire and water swallowed everything. She could still hear the screams of her teammates, of the hostages, of her best friend Mason, who had been right beside her. Go, Hawk! Get them out! He had shouted as he pushed her toward the lifeboat. She had tried to reach him, but the deck collapsed. The fire spread. The blast wave hit Dot and Mason. Didn't make it. Elena woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Djibouti, her body covered in burns and scars that still whispered the memory of that night. The official report called it a successful partial extraction, but to her, it was a failure she carried. Every single day. That's why she left the Navy. Not because she was weak, but because she couldn't look at the ocean anymore without seeing the faces of those she couldn't save. She found this small cafe near the coast, close enough to feel the sea breeze, far enough to avoid its ghosts. She told herself she could start over, that she could serve people in peace instead of in war. But when that man pointed a gun at her tonight, her instincts had woken up. Her body remembered the drills, the missions, the sound of bullets, and the guilt came crashing back. She turned off the cafe lights, walked out into the rain, and looked toward the ocean in the distance, dark and endless. For a long time, she just stood there, eyes closed, letting the storm soak through her clothes. Then she whispered, almost like a prayer, I'm still here. Mason. Thunder rumbled in reply. The next morning, she came back to the cafe early. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. She brewed a pot of coffee and tried to forget the night before, but she couldn't. Around 8 a.m., the doorbell chimed. A man in a Navy uniform stepped in tall, in his 40s, wearing medals and a calm authority that said, Officer, Lieutenant Reyes? Yes. She froze. Not anymore, sir. It's just Elena now. He smiled faintly. You may have left the Navy, but the Navy hasn't left you. She sighed, motioning for him to sit. How'd you find me? The police report, he said, pulling a folder from his coat. You handled 3 armed men with precision SEAL tactics. That got attention. I didn't do it for attention, she replied sharply. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. He slid the folder across the table. Inside were photographs, familiar faces. Her old team. Training grounds. A new mission heading labeled Operation Neptune Shadow. She looked up, frowning. What is this? An invitation, he said. We're rebuilding a covert unit for special humanitarian extractions, rescuing civilians from conflict zones. No politics, just pure purpose. And we need someone with your instincts. Elena hesitated. Her mind replayed that night on the ocean. Mason's voice. His last words, Go, Hawk. Get them out. Her heart clenched. I can't go back, she whispered. The officer nodded slowly. You don't have to. But maybe you can finally move forward. He stood, leaving the file on the table. Think about it. When he left, she sat there in silence, staring at the mission details. Rain had stopped. The cafe was quiet again. But inside her, something had shifted, something small, but real. For the first time in years, Elena didn't feel the weight of guilt pressing her down. She felt a pulse of purpose, faint, but alive. Maybe she wasn't done serving after all. The cafe opened as usual the next morning. Elena poured coffee, greeted regulars, and forced a small smile when people mentioned the incident. News traveled fast. Everyone in town, now knew about the waitress who disarmed soldiers. Some called her brave, some called her dangerous. She called herself tired. Mission file the officer had left sat in her locker. She told herself she wouldn't open it again. But her hands betrayed her. Every time she wiped the counter or poured a cup, her eyes drifted to that door. To the folder inside Dot by afternoon, she gave up pretending. She locked the cafe early, brewed a fresh pot, and sat down at her favorite booth, the one by the window, where the ocean was just a faint line in the distance. She opened the file. Inside were names, coordinates, and one photograph that stopped her heart. A group of women and children trapped in a coastal village in Yemen. The intel said they'd been taken by the same group her team had once fought. Her pulse quickened. Same tactics. Same insignia. Same nightmare. The paper in her hand trembled. This wasn't just another mission. This was unfinished business. She stared at Mason's old dog tag, which she still wore under her shirt, the last piece of him she had left. She whispered, "If I go back, I might not come home again." Then after a pause, "But if I don't, someone else might not make it home either." The storm inside her heart began to shift. That night she drove to the beach. The moonlight glistened on the wet sand, and the waves rolled in slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. She sat there in her jacket, staring at the horizon, talking to the sea as if it could hear her. "I tried to forget," she said softly. "Tried to build a life where no one got hurt. But maybe that's not who I am." She clenched her fists, feeling the rough texture of the sand beneath her palms. "I can't bring you back, Mason, but I can make what you die for mean something." A tear rolled down her cheek, mixing with the salt of the sea breeze. Then she stood, took one last look at the dark horizon, and whispered, "Time to go back." Hawk. 2 weeks later, the cafe was sold, the neon sign taken down. All that remained was an empty lot and the faint memory of a woman who had once served coffee there. At a military airfield outside Coronado. A small black helicopter waited under the floodlights. Elena, dressed in tactical black, hair tied tightly back, approached the craft with the same calm stride she'd once had years ago. Her badge read LT raised again. The officer from before greeted her with a knowing smile. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "Neither did I," she said, stepping onto the platform. "But unfinished missions don't sit well with me." He handed her a headset. "Good to have you back, Hawk." As the rotors began to spin, she looked out at the ocean. Endless, powerful, and familiar. Her reflection in the window looked like two people, the soldier she used to be and the woman who had finally stopped running. She took a deep breath and whispered, "For you, Mason." The helicopter lifted off, vanishing into the night sky. The moonlight glimmered on the waves below, and for the first time in years, Elena felt at peace, not because the war was over, but because she finally found the courage to face it again. They say you can run from the battlefield, but not from the ghosts it leaves behind. Sometimes. Healing doesn't mean hiding. It means going back, not to fight, but to finish what was started. I really appreciate you watching all the way through. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile for a moment, let me know in the comments. I read them all, and they honestly keep me going more than you can imagine.